There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with another Totally Blind page 112 tag. My explanations of these tags are going to get briefer and briefer the more of them that I do, but of course you can check the full explanation in the show notes. The page 112 tag is based on a literary prize in France where the judges choose a short list based on page 112 only, with no identifying author or title information of the titles selected for the long list. So I adapted that for this tag and did several of these, and other people have done them as well, and most notably Steve Donahue, where we chose books from our own libraries, but didn't tell you, the viewer, who the author or the title was, and we had not read the books ourselves, but had them in our possession. That tag worked wonderfully well, and then one of my subscribers challenged me to do a Totally Blind tag where she sent me page 112s from her library. So I was reading and evaluating them totally blind, which is how the literary prize works. So I'm going to do another one of those Totally Blind tags, and I'll have a comment on another variation of this page 112 tag at the end of this video. This content, these page 112s, were submitted by Wayne, who many of you know as Southern Biscuits. He's a frequent commenter on our BookTube channels and should have one of his own, I think. And I haven't, this one is even blinder than the last one because I haven't even actually read these to myself. So I'll be stumbling over some of them, I'm sure. But let's get started. Book number one starts in mid-sentence at the top of the page. I usually don't do that, but I see I'm going to miss a lot if I go to the first full sentence, so I will break with precedence. This is totally no rules here. There's no rules at all, but I tend to start with full sentences myself. But I'm going to not do that with book number one. Later got locked in the ice plant and froze to death. Served him right. Snatched at me, but I bolted across the field and crouched down in the tallest grass. I don't think they bothered to look for me. They had their hands so full with Catherine. She fought them the whole way, and I watched her, sick with knowing there was no help to give, until they passed out of sight over the ridge into the cemetery. Overhead, two squawking crows crossed, recrossed, as though making an evil sign. I crept toward the woods. Near me then I heard boots cutting through the grass. It was the sheriff. With him was a man called Will Harris. Tall as a doer, buffalo-shouldered, Will Harris had once had his throat eaten out by a mad dog. The scars were bad enough, but his damaged voice was worse. It sounded giddy and babyfied, like a midget's. They passed so close I could have untied Will's shoes. His tiny voice, shrilling at the sheriff, jumped with Morris Ritz's name and Verena's. I couldn't make out exactly, except something had happened about Morris Ritz, and Verena had sent Will to bring back the sheriff. The sheriff said, "What in hell does the woman want, an army?" When they were gone, I sprang up and ran into the woods. In sight of the china tree, I hid behind a fan of fern. I thought one of the sheriff's men might still be hanging around, but there was nothing, simply a lonely singing bird. And no one in the tree house. Smoky as ghosts, streamers of sunlight illuminated its emptiness. Numbly I moved into view and leaned my head against the tree's trunk. All this, the vision of the houseboat returned. Our laundry flapped, the geranium bloomed, the carrying river carried us out to sea, into the world. Colin. My name fell out of the sky. Is that you I hear? Are you crying? It was Dolly, calling from somewhere I could not see, until, climbing to the tree's heart, I saw in the above distance Dolly's dangling childish shoe. "Careful, boy," said the judge, who was beside her. "You'll shake us out of here." Indeed, like gulls resting on a ship's mast, they were sitting in the absolute tower of the tree. Afterwards, Dolly was to remark that the view afforded was so enthralling she regretted not having visited there before. The judge, it developed, had seen the approach of the sheriff and his men in time for them to take refuge in those heights. "Wait, we're coming," she said, and with one arm steadied by the judge, she descended like a fine lady, sweeping down a flight of stairs. We kissed each other. She continued to hold me. "She went to look for you, Catherine. We didn't know where you were. And I was so afraid. Her fear tingled my hands. She felt like a shaking small animal, a rabbit just taken from the trap." Oh my goodness! Quite a lot of action there, hey? What the heck is going on? I like the writing. I think the writing is really great. I love so many turns of phrases and sentences like, "Will Harris had his throat eaten out by a mad dog," and his voice sounded giddy and babyfied like a midget's. What in hell does the woman want? An army? There's a lot of great. There's a lot of things I really like about the writing. I don't know about the story. Is it like a Western? It's not a genre Western. It certainly sounds literary enough. The narrator is fleeing the sheriff. So Colin's friend Catherine seems to have been captured, but Colin has evaded capture. And then Dolly and the judge are in the tree. At that point, when we got Dolly and judge in the tree, I guess my mind flashed to other novels I have read, and I thought, was this kind of a slave escape or something like that? But I don't think so. It doesn't ultimately have that ring to it. I'm intrigued by this. I will have to think about it in relation to the other two, but all I can say at present is I'm very curious about what is this about, and I like the writing. So, book number 2. Mitten was at present still in Bordeaux, where it was dangerous to send him since he prolonged his visit so unconscionably, conducting some negotiations with a small house with which we had newly begun to do some business. Mitten was a Roman Catholic, a Sybarite, and an ass, but he was loyal and a decent judge of wine, and went down splendidly with my more snobbish clientele. I could trust him with the visiting, though not of course with the tasting, and I noted that my next essential engagement was to taste hock, of which we still handled a little, on the 30th of January. Of course, I always politely consulted Mitten, and very occasionally listened to his advice on what to buy, but a director of a small wine firm tends to become an omnipotent and jealous deity, and it was on my palate alone that the firm of Lynch Gibbon depended. And as I had no paternal feelings towards Mitten, and did not believe that I could train him to be a second me, the little firm would doubtless perish with me, and the particular piece of reality represented by the discerning taste which my father had so carefully trained and fostered in his son would vanish away forever. Until the truant Mitten's return, my two excellent secretaries, Miss Hernshaw and Miss Sealhaft, could get on perfectly well on their own. I prized these girls exceedingly, as they could write accurate and even witty business letters in French and German, and by now knew the business very well indeed, though, quaintly, they had no understanding of wine, and praised anything that was offered to them. They had been with me for some years now, and I had been very worried in case one or other of them should take it into her head to get married, until the day when I realized, through some imperceptible but cumulative gathering of impressions, that they were a happy and well-suited lesbian couple. Today I had, with each of them separately, gone through the painful business of telling them about my divorce. I was made aware that they already knew. So gleefully fast does bad news travel. They stood now by the door, waiting without visible impatience to see the last of me. Their faces and attitudes expressed their respective modes of sympathy. Tall, fair Miss Hernshaw, long, vainly courted by the imperceptive Mitten, swaying, moist-eyed, and ready to hold my hand. Short, dark Miss Sealhaft, frowning with concern as she polished her spectacles, darting me glances of brisk commiseration. I left them at last to the debris of the Christmas orders and the joys of each other's company, and drove my car to Pelham Crescent. Antonia was wearing a brown cashmere pullover and a string of pearls, neither of which I had seen before. She had never used to buy so much as a handkerchief without consulting me. I noticed, too, half relieved, that she was in a state of restless irritation, and in no mood to ply me with her tenderness. She jumped up when she saw me and said, "Really, I think she might have waited a bit before dismantling the house." Who? Well, I like that one too, and I'm surprised at how much I like it, because there's a lot of what I awkwardly refer to as Latinate prose. These are words that I don't like. They're so Latinate and don't get you in the gut. Unconscionably. So many. Sybarite, essential engagement, omnipotent, discerning, truant, imperceptible, cumulative. So many polysyllabic words that usually turn me off, and it just works here. I love it when I can talk myself out of my also special opinions about what I do and don't like. Oh, I think it works. There's another one, splendidly. I think it works splendidly here. I guess because it's the writer's deep style, and it just flows. And it's funny. This I really enjoy the voice. The narrative voice is very appealing, and the whimsy of it is what I respond to. I think it's really well written. It's so different from the first one. I'm intrigued. So, what do you think? Is this going to be a three-way tie? Third and final book. It was the Paupers' Salon for poets, radicals, beggars, artists, and people in love. For Catholics, Protestants, Brahmins, dabblers in black magic and medicine. All these could be seen sitting about her oak table before the huge fire, Nora listening, her hand on her hound, the firelight throwing her shadow, and his high against the wall. Of all that ranting, roaring crew, she alone stood out. The equilibrium of her nature, savage and refined, gave her bridled skull a look of compassion. She was broad and tall, and though her skin was the skin of a child, there could be seen coming, early in her life, the design that was to be the weather-beaten grain of her face, that wood in the work, the tree coming forward in her, an undocumented record of time. She was known instantly as a Westerner. Looking at her, foreigners remembered stories they had heard of covered wagons, animals going down to drink, children's heads just as far as the eyes, looking in fright out of small windows, where in the dark another race crouched in ambush. With heavy hems, the women becoming large, flattening the fields where they walked. God so ponderous in their minds that they could stamp out the world with him in 7 days. At these incredible meetings, one felt that early American history was being reenacted. The drummer boy, Fort Sumter, Lincoln, Booth, all somehow came to mind. Whigs and Tories were in the air, bunting and its stripes and stars, the swarm increasingly, slowly, and accurately on the hive of blue. Boston tea tragedies, carbines, and the sound of a boy's wild calling. Puritan feet, long upright in the grave, striking the earth again, walking up and out of their custom. The caulk of prayers thrust in the heart. And in the midst of this, Nora. By temperament, Nora was an early Christian. She believed the Word. There is a gap in world pain through which the singular falls continually and forever, a body falling in observable space, deprived of the privacy of disappearance, as if privacy, moving relentlessly away, by the very sustaining power of its withdrawal, kept the body eternally moving downward, but in one place and perpetually before the eye. Such a singular was Nora. There was some derangement in her equilibrium that kept her immune from her own descent. Nora had the face of all people who love the people, a face that would be evil when she found out that to love without criticism is to be betrayed. Nora robbed herself for everyone. Incapable of giving herself warning, she was continually turning about to find herself diminished. Wandering people the world over found her profitable in that she could be sold for a price forever, for she carried her betrayal money in her own pocket. Those who love everything are despised by everything, as those who love a city in its profoundest sense become the shame of that city, the détraqués, the paupers. Their good is incommunicable, outwitted, being the rudiment of a life that has developed, as in man's body are found evidences of lost needs. This condition had struck even into Nora's house. It spoke in her guests, in her ruined gardens, where she had been wax in every work of nature. Okay, well that one is definitely number 3, but there were things about it I liked too, but mostly I didn't care for it at all. To me, it reads more like an essay than fiction, and there were a couple phrases that I really quite liked, but mostly I could feel my eyes glazing over as I read. It was very abstract, philosophical. I liked the image about the weather-beaten grain of her face. That was quite striking. God so ponderous in their minds that they could stamp out the world with him in 7 days. I liked that. But I don't really feel curious to find out anything more about Nora. And she's the only person in this. The rest of it is kind of philosophical observations on her and her time, and this one left me rather cold. With the exception of a couple nicely turned phrases, that one left me cold. So, book number 1 is this very dramatic scene where Colin is escaping the sheriff. His friend Catherine doesn't escape, and he comes across Dolly and Judge, who seem to be on his side. And it's very well written and very dramatic. Book number 2 has a real sensibility, a kind of a really intelligent comic sensibility to it. And it's very expository for the most part, but it is so brilliantly written, I think, that every word is in place, and it's just really attractive. And book number 3 didn't really work for me aside from a couple turns of phrase. So, even though book number 2 is in a style that I tend not to go for, quite highfalutin, $64 adjectives and whatnot, and Latinate prose, really for that reason, because I'm so drawn to it in spite of my predilection, my first choice is book number 2. But book number 1 would be a close second, and the third book would be a very distant third, I think. So, I have no idea what these books are. I have a second email from Wayne in my email inbox, so let's have a look, shall we? Oh, how interesting is this? I haven't read any of these books, but I'm, very familiar with them as titles and their authors. Wow, I'm so intrigued. So the first book is The Grass Harp by Truman Capote. I have read his first novel. Name is gone. But that's all. And the second book is A Severed Head by Iris Murdoch. I have never read Iris Murdoch. I really enjoyed that. I wondered if I was not going to like her, but based on that page 112, and A Severed Head, if I'm not mistaken, is kind of an intertext with Jane Eyre. Isn't that right? Isn't it about the mad Mrs. Rochester in the attic? Maybe I've got that wrong. But it's been kind of inching up in my mental TBR, and I know Stephen Partridge is a big fan and has a video series on Iris Murdoch. And the third book is Nightwood by Duna Barnes. I used to have that book. I had that. It's probably in a box somewhere in Canada, but I had that book on read on my shelf, and I didn't like the prose at all. And some people have been talking about it recently. They really liked it, and based on that, I wouldn't be for me. So that is the page 112 tag. Thank you so much, Wayne, for getting these excerpts to me. If anybody else would like to do this with me, please leave a comment, and I'd be happy to do it. but the first time I did it with Marina, I could read in my email preview the titles in the second email, so we had to redo it. But that wasn't an issue. But I think if you put it way down in the body of the email, it's not going to come up in the email preview. Or what I have done when I sent Steve stuff was put it in a Word document or whatever on page 2, so that there was no danger of it being disclosed to me prematurely. I will continue to do my own usual page 112s, where I choose books off my shelves that I haven't read, because people enjoy that, and I enjoy it too. It reacquaints me with what's on my shelf and makes me want to read it faster than I ever would have. But in closing, I just wanted to comment on the adaptation of this tag that has been happening spontaneously. I think it's great. I must admit, the first time that I saw a version of this tag where people held up the book and talked about the book and showed the cover before they read the page 112 excerpts confused me. But the more I thought about it, it is equally valid, because yes, the way that I'm doing it, blind or not telling you who the titles and authors are, does replicate the literary prize process. But how practical is that? The practical version of this tag is, and I use it all the time, is when I go to a bookstore and I've got 4 books, but I only have enough money to buy 2, is I will sit down and I will read page 112. And the 2 of those that I like the best are the ones that I buy. So it's very practical. Rarely, never, unless we are on that literary prize jury, we don't ever get a chance to evaluate a piece of fiction based on 1 page without any other identifying information. It's totally unrealistic. I think it makes for a great tag video. I think it's entertaining. It's very viewer-centric. So I want to continue doing it. But I think anybody who wants to do it by saying, I've got 4 books and which one should I read next? And here, this is number 1 and I'll read it. Why not? That's how we can use this book selection strategy in our lives. So I think it's just great. You have my blessing, darlings. All right, thanks for watching.